And guys, in this next news story, chaos erupted in a pub after a feud between two traveller families turned violent. Two members of the Joyce family have been jailed in the incident that unfolded at a pub in Collyhurst after Joyce's and members of the Doughty family clashed. Dougie Joyce, who's 36, and his brother Tom Joyce, who's 27, were both handed jail sentences for violent disorder after trouble broke out for about half an hour. Manchester Crown Court heard that the incident ended with two members of the Doughty family being taken to hospital having suffered very bad injuries. The two families had attended the pub as part of a wake following the death of two young men who were part of the traveller community. It marks the latest episode in a long-running feud between the families. The prosecutors told how trouble began at around 5 o'clock in the evening of Friday, October the 2nd, 2020. They said footage from the pub showed signs of conflict and verbal rows before it turned violent about 20 minutes later, with two groups of about 10 young men forming distinct groups. At one point, Tom Joyce grabbed a bottle of beer inside the pub and smashed it before wielding it, and as trouble spilled out onto the car park, Tom Joyce continued to be armed with the bottle. As the fight broke out, he struck a member of the Doughty family in the face with it. He could be seen to be covered in copious amounts of blood, as Joyce was then assaulted by others himself. Dougie Joyce also smashed the bottle in the build-up, but he did not use it and dropped it. He armed himself with a plastic pipe and threw it at another man, the prosecutor said. The injured men were bundled into a car and taken to the Manchester Royal Infirmary, and they refused to provide statements to police, and the two Joyces were interviewed the following year and answered no comment to questions. Tom Joyce was sentenced to 22 months in prison, while Dougie was handed a 13-month jail term, and both will serve half their sentences behind bars. Dougie was already serving a 19-month sentence for causing GBH after launching an attack on a 78-year-old man in the Northern Quarter, and his victim was left bloodied and bruised after being punched 3 times to the face during a row in October 2022. Dougie was believed to have been released from that sentence in about a week's time, but will likely have to serve another 6 months behind bars. The judge noted a pattern of violent offending in his case when dismissing the appeal made by Dougie's lawyer for him to receive a suspended sentence. The recorder Karen Ridge said the footage from the pub depicted the story of horrors that unfolded that day. The judge said she accepted there was an element of provocation and that Dougie was said to have been trying to protect younger members of the family. Dougie's barrister said that he admitted smashing the bottle but had an epiphany and dropped it, realizing his actions were incredibly stupid. He said that the footage did not show him fighting with anyone. He said there is an extraordinary number of people involved in this incident. The only 2 people charged as a result of that evening through the CCTV is in very clear technicolor. The doc today. He said that testimonials submitted on Mr. Joyce's behalf described him as an upstanding and good moral standing, and added that he'd been involved in helping the homeless and with food banks. Tom Joyce's barrister said that his client had not been the instigator and claimed he was peripheral in the fracas. He said that Mr. Joyce had spent time in prison for a previous offence and came out a changed man. So guys, in this next news story, these were the luxury watches worn by a father and son as the pair were caught at an airport in Manchester. Asim Tufail and Junaid Tufail were waiting in the departure lounge in Terminal 1 to board a flight to Dubai. The pair, who are both gun runners and drug dealers, were in it together, prosecutor said. Asim was wearing a diamond-encrusted Rolex worth £70,000, with his son wearing an £11,000 Rolex. It's believed the 52-year-old drove expensive cars and made large cash purchases, including splashing out £10,000 on a home gym, Manchester Crown Court heard. Asim was jailed for 23 years after a judge said he was involved in a crime at a very high level indeed. His son is due to be sentenced at a later date. The prosecutor, Tim Story KC, said there was no record with Revenue and Customs of Asim being paid for legitimate work. He said the reason for his income was this: he was operating among a criminal network with interests in the international laundering of money, trafficking in drugs, sourcing guns, ammunition and other lethal weaponry for his contacts. Such were his links to other criminal entities that he also acted on their behalf in enforcing debts. Junaid Tufail saw his father as his role model and ended up following him into crime. Asim had spent much of his son's childhood in jail after previously being sentenced to 14 years for drug dealing, but his release, Asim simply carried on committing crime. Azim's barrister said there was an element of bravado and showing off in his EncroChat message. He says, for all his talk, very little actually took place. His role was not as great as the Crown might like to suggest. They weren't really ever in a position to provide firearms. Junaid is believed to have had no previous convictions, and his barrister described the defendant as a Walter Mitty character who had been taken for a ride himself. He said this offending has effectively demonstrated a hope that dipping his toes into the big boy league has burnt him. The barrister also said the defendant had experienced a difficult childhood and had spent time in care. Azim Tufel was found guilty of 2 counts of conspiracy to supply Class A, 3 counts of conspiracy to sell or transfer prohibited weapons, 2 counts of blackmail and money laundering. Junaid Tufel pleaded guilty after his trial had started to 1 count of conspiracy to Class A, 2 counts of conspiracy to transfer or sell a prohibited weapon, and there were 2 of the men sentenced as part of the case: Danny Palmer, who's 42 years old, and Peter Lawler, who's 53. So Azim Tufel, he was jailed for 23 years. The son is going to be sentenced at a later date. And the 2 other blokes, Peter Lawler and Danny Palmer. So Peter Lawler, he was jailed for 4 years and 4 months, and Palmer was also jailed. And guys, in this next news story, 2 men who stabbed a teenager in Eastville, leaving him with knife lodged in his shoulder, have been jailed. Bristol Crown Court heard Real Shashmiz and Romaine Mullings, who were also both teenagers at the time, attacked Dante Davis in Eastville in May 2021. Although Dante survived the assault, he was actually killed 5 months later by another teenager in St. Philip's. Real and Romaine were last year charged with wounding and weapons offences following what police described as a lengthy investigation. They found guilty after a trial in March of this year and sentenced yesterday. An Avon, a Somerset police spokesperson, said when police and ambulance crew arrived following the 999 calls about the attack, they found Dante Davis still had a knife embedded in his shoulder. He had also been stabbed in the head, abdomen and buttock, but despite requiring hospital treatment, his injuries were not life-threatening. Both men were arrested later that day after attending hospital for treatments of injuries of their own. One of them also had a knife wound to his upper back, while the other one had injuries to his neck and arm, so it seems as though that it was a knife fight. Dante actually died after being stabbed again in October 2021 near Old Market. His killer, Kayron Sawyers, is serving a 9-year jail term after being cleared of murder but convicted of manslaughter in 2022 when he was just 19 years old. The judge jailed both men, so Schmarschmist got a total of 5.5 years for wounding with intent and causing GBH, and he's told he will serve 3 years and 4 months before he can be considered for release. And Mulling was jailed for 1 year and 8 months for wounding and possessing an offensive weapon, plus an extra 6 months for dangerous driving, 8 months for possessing drugs with intent to supply. He was told he would serve half of his 2-year, 10-month sentence. Mulling was also disqualified from driving for 29 months for the dangerous driving incident. Guys, there's a number of stories. It's your boy GT. Keep it locked, keep it real.